Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today I decided to set myself a little challenge. I say today, but this PC was the result of a few weeks worth of hunting for deals. You see, I wanted to put together the cheapest thing I could, the cheapest build I could, made up of entirely new parts. Now it didn't matter where I got these, just as long as they were new. So without further ado, let's get into it and talk about the parts I found. But first, this is the creation that we've managed to put together. Another thing, I can't believe they didn't play Sweet Victory at the Super Bowl. I spent an hour and a half watching the first part of a sport I don't understand the rules to, anticipating that SpongeBob tribute, and it never happened. Anyway, back to the subject at hand here. So to kick things off, we have the deal that I'm happiest about, yet one I feel quite conscious about too. This is a Thermaltake RGB Smart 500 watt PSU, and it retails close to £40 normally in the UK. Now there's a car boot sale near me that runs every week, maybe twice a week on occasion, and I've managed to pick up cheap PC parts from there before. This was no exception, although the story behind it is a little bit different. See, this was being sold by someone's mum. Her son was in Australia and she was having a clear out of his bedroom. He's not going to be too happy that she sold this for the grand sum of £15, so I'm sort of anticipating a knock at the door when he gets back from his trip. Nonetheless, this was a still brand new sealed RGB power supply. The lights all change colour and that. There's a button that allows you to do so, and I think it's a pretty good deal. Now I could have hopped on eBay and perhaps tried to search for a 300 watt standard grey box that may have done the job for this build, but I've had cheap unbranded PSUs pop on me before and it really isn't a pleasant experience, put it that way. It sounds like someone throwing a 28-piece cutlery set into a washing machine. Now the case is an interesting one because I found this at the local PC shop, and the box, the cardboard box that it came in, had severe damage despite it being still sealed. Now the owner wasn't sure if this damage had gone through to the case itself, and lo and behold, unfortunately it had done. The corner here is damaged. I gave it a bit of a tickle with some super glue to try and fix things up a bit because the power button was also jammed and I sort of had to pull it out and stick the corner back on, but nonetheless it was still brand new and should therefore still have a manufacturer warranty with it. He had only had it in the shop for a few months, but this damage to the box was apparently putting off potential buyers until I came along, of course. Now this is an AMD A6 5400K. It was marked as brand new and in fact it was still sealed, coming with the original low profile cooler and now pretty much solid thermal paste. This was the first thing that needed replacing, and for this processor I paid the grand sum of just £6. Now you may think that's incredibly cheap, but to be honest, this is an end-of-life product that was never really all that popular when it first came out. And now with the release of AMD's more powerful Ryzen APUs, there really is no need to buy one of these, so a lot of sellers are trying to get rid of them or their surplus stock as quickly as they can. So whilst this may sound quite cheap, it really isn't that impressive in terms of a deal. Now my choice of hard drive wasn't a particularly spacious one, but with 250 gigs available, this should be enough to store some of the test games like Fortnite and CSGO no problem. At a cost of £11.79 as well, brand new on eBay, still sealed, I don't think you can really go wrong. This was cheaper than a lot of the 80 gig SATA drives I was seeing too, and it was pretty much the cheapest when I sorted things from lowest price first. The seller was actually having a clear out of some surplus stock. I think this was bankrupt stock actually, so it had been stuff taken from a retailer that could no longer afford to keep their store open, and someone had bought it all up and was selling the entirety of their stock. The motherboard, that was an easy choice. I needed to opt for FM2 considering I found the A6 5400K, which is socket FM2, and this wasn't really that difficult. Just like the CPU, this tech is pretty much obsolete and it isn't really desired by anyone, so I was able to pick up this Gigabyte board for just £20, still new and sealed. This meant that it did still come with all of the original accessories and the backplate too. Now some of you may remember a while ago I picked up a Mini ITX Core i5 motherboard bundle. I've shown you it briefly because I used it to test out the GTX 960 the other day. Anyway, this came with some Crucial Ballistics memory, and since then I decided I wanted to try and opt for some of that with this build. Now the reason for this is because it's cheap and it's pretty reliable from my experience, and I could have easily stuck 2 gigs of DDR3 in this thing if we were aiming for the absolute cheapest, but for the £20 I paid for this, I thought it was a pretty good deal. I mean, I couldn't really find much DDR3 cheaper than this anyway, brand new, and this stuff came from my local CEX, which is like a gold mine for RAM. It doesn't matter whether it's new or used. In some cases it doesn't matter the speed, because it usually costs about £10 per stick of 4GB, so that really isn't a deal to be sniffed at. And if we want to get any sort of decent, or hope to get any sort of decent gaming performance from this thing, well, 8GB sounds like just the right amount. I will say that this isn't exactly a build that anyone can put together. It does take things to the extreme a little bit, in that I was waiting quite a while for some components to become available for quite decent money. But I do aim to put something together that is more accessible for everyone, so to speak. So how does it perform? Well, let's head on over to Cinebench R15 to begin with to check out CPU performance. You can see here that Cinebench recognises the AMD A6 as a single core CPU with 2 threads. The reason for this is quite complicated, but essentially it's the same situation as with the FX lineup. You may remember the whole cores and modules situation. Essentially what we have here is a chip with 1 module but 2 logical cores, I think. It still confuses me, but it's better than, say, a true single-core chip with hyper-threading, put it that way. The single-core performance result was 89, 1 point higher than a single-core Celeron GeForce 60 from Intel, and the multi-core performance was 125, just 20 points clear of a Pentium E5400. But could this thing play any games? Well, this is where I'm glad I opted for 8 gigs of memory, though no amount of RAM would help us out in Overwatch, as the CPU simply held us back. Running at 100% usage on both cores, the game was quite stuttery and laggy. This footage was taken from a bot match, but I can tell you that online games will have the same outcome. You can see that the onboard Radeon GPU has a lot more to give, but it simply can't because of the bottleneck. The settings and resolution here were low, with 50% res scaling and 720p set from the menu. Any preset yielded the same or worse result, as this was pretty much as low as we could go. In fact, I had to run away from enemy action at one point just to try and recapture some lost frames. I thought this meant we'd have a totally unplayable experience throughout, but at least CSGO proved to be a better performer. In fact, I actually played quite well. Well, up until the point I got destroyed. Neither the CPU or GPU was running maxed out here, so we were able to hit 40 FPS at 720p with the low settings. Far from ideal in a fast-paced shooter like this, but it was certainly an improvement over Overwatch. I played a couple of traditional games on Dust 2 and a couple on other maps, with this being the average throughout all of them. I didn't play the new Battle Royale mode, so frame rates there may differ. Now, Fortnite was an interesting one. The game loaded up and played just fine at low settings at a 3D rendering resolution of something like 843 by 480. Not brilliant, but it doesn't look too bad on the big screen here. The problem I was having, however, was only made apparent after landing on the ground. All the textures were messed up and there was some sort of glitch where I just slid along the floor. The frame rate stayed pretty consistent, so I'm not sure if this is an effect of the hardware itself or just an internet issue. 42 frames per second was the average. I tried another couple of games and the same thing, so I'm beginning to think this is hardware related. Trying to land on this tree and then falling to my death didn't really help the situation either. It was then time for a couple of older titles. Oblivion was first, and at 720p with the large texture settings, we saw an average of 50 FPS. I'm not sure if this shows how demanding this game is or how bad the AMD A6 is. Either way, a full 60 frames per second could only be achieved by turning things down, though even then FPS was by no means consistent. Finally, I then tried GTA San Andreas, a true classic. 1080p very high saw a stuttery 40 FPS, but I had to turn any anti-aliasing off or face even more performance hiccups. In fact, 720p was once again the best way to play to see 50 frames per second. Even so, it's not fantastic performance and really shows how far AMD's APUs have come since this lineup. So, I guess there we have it. This was the cheapest new parts PC I could put together. Was it worth it? Well, I'm certain a better used PC could be built for less, but here we have all unused components, all under warranty, coming together to form a PC that isn't too bad when it comes to everyday and general usage. It will even play a few games on lower settings if you don't mind frame rates that sit closer to 30 FPS, more often than not. On that note, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it. leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I will see all of you in the next one.